I'm watching ESPN or the NFL Live, and those guys come on, and I blame a lot of it really on the executives in the media, because really Jay Feely's the only guy that speaks about special teams during games.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, the conversation was about the Chargers, and they said, we just can't work out why the Chargers just can't get over the line. They've got a young quarterback who threw for 5,000 yards last year. They've got a great defense with Joey Bosa and those guys there. They just can't, and they were 9-8 last year. And I'm like, no one's talking about the fact their special teams has been 30th in the league since Mike Scifres retired. They've picked horrible punters. They regularly give up 50 and 60-yard returns in a game. And so the conversation never really happens about special teams, only about offense and defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit there frustrated and pull out what's left of my hair going, well, that's because you're obviously not looking at the reason. They missed, 8 field goals during the season. The year after Mike was there, they had a young kid there. He dropped 2 snaps on punts. He shanked 2 punts coming out of the end zone, and he dropped a snap on a field goal, and they were 9-7. So if 2 of those games they win, they're 11-5. They make the playoffs. So I think that at the time, they're talking about, the offense did this, offense. There was 4 losses that you could put on one person's shoulders right there. So, I think there is a big conversation about offense and defense, but not many people know about the special teams part of the game.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, you mentioned Scifres too. Like he had hurt in 2014, really bad injury that happened to him. I feel bad for him because he was very good. The kicking game though too, ever since Nate Kaeding got hurt, how many different kickers did they go through too? And they kept having to cut them, and they were never great either. So yeah, the Chargers definitely.
Look, I tell the story about Mike Scifres. We're punting against. He's playing against. I was doing the pregame show for the Chargers, and we're playing against Indianapolis. And there's about a minute to go in the game, and Peyton Manning and Tom Moore are standing on the sideline, and they've got the playbook open like this. And Peyton Manning's going, "I like this play. I like this play," and he's presuming that Mike's going to hit a 45, 50-yard punt. They're going to get a 5 or 8-yard return, and they need 2 first downs to kick a field goal. And they're focused on those guys on the sideline. Mike hits a 73-yard punt. And as the ball's in the air, Peyton Manning looks and he closes like 3 pages of the playbook because he couldn't use any of those plays. And then he got sacked, and then they never got a first down, and the Chargers win the game. It was the best punt. I think Mike punted 6 times. He averaged like 57 yards, and he had like 4 inside the 10. It was ridiculous. So years later, Peyton goes to Denver, and Mike said he runs out, he's warming up, and Peyton runs right up to about 6 inches from his face. He goes, "Damn it, you're still in the league." So for a punter to get in a Hall of Famer's quarterback's head, that's when he was such a weapon at the Chargers.
Yeah, the Chargers owned Peyton Manning throughout his career too. They had that 1 playoff win. They had the 6 interception game. I mean, it wasn't just that.
Yeah, unfortunately, Nate Keating missed a couple of field goals, and Marty Schottenheimer sat on the ball against New England one year and against the Jets, and it was a bit of a disaster when they got into the playoffs those years.
Yeah, that 2009 Chargers team was loaded. I'm still shocked they lost to the Jets that year. I remember.
I mean, you look, you got Drew Brees, and you got Phillip Rivers, and you got LaDainian Tomlinson, and it just was man after man after man. You go, this is the best team the Chargers have ever had, and then they just got to the playoffs and played a different game. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's my Jets.
Yeah, actually, that was my next question. Drew Brees, you got to be teammates with him as a young player. So what was he like, and also LaDainian Tomlinson when he was a young player?
Yeah, I mean, Drew was terrific. The one person that I would say really had a massive influence on Drew is they brought Doug Flutie in, and I think what he did was when Drew took over, we were playing against Chicago. Drew stepped in, and he didn't have a great game that year, that first game, but you could see Doug on the sideline just teaching him how to play. And I think what he did was he gave Drew the understanding that you don't have to be 6'5" to play the quarterback position. The one thing that they used to do every practice is they would play the trash bin and the crossbar game. And that what they were doing was they were building this really minute accuracy. And if you look at some of the passes Drew threw over his career, there's not many guys that could be as pinpoint accurate as he was. He threw such a beautiful ball. And, and I think Doug had a huge influence on him in his first couple of years of teaching him how to be a pro. Just don't listen to the outside talk about you have to be 6'5" to play this position. Find your own throwing lanes. And he really did. Drew became a real aficionado of how to move inside the pocket and still know where your throwing lanes were. So I couldn't be proud of what his career was. And I think, it was tough when he left the Chargers, but I've talked to Drew about this, and I was like, New Orleans needed a hero and you needed a new challenge, and they found each other at the right time. And look at what he went and did when he was in New Orleans. It was terrific.
One of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. One of the top 5 greatest quarterbacks.
And I think if he'd stayed at the Chargers, may not have happened.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that. But Phillip Rivers came in, and with the knee injury that he had, I think they wanted to move forward with obviously Rivers. And Drew Brees is still very well respected in the San Diego community and obviously the LA community because of what he is and what he really gave back to football. And I've always liked Drew. I think it was a real big loss what NBC did to him. But I think he wanted out of that. But I think it was just so disrespectful. You sign somebody like that, and then you part ways after a year or so. I completely disagree.
Yeah, look, Drew will go on and do bigger and better things. I think he's, maybe he didn't enjoy it. I haven't spoken to him in a little while, but when he did that shoulder, you could understand why the Chargers did it. But at the time, AJ Smith was hell bent on building only guys that he had something to do with drafting. And John Butler had drafted Drew. And so it's also why they shortened LaDainian's time at the Chargers, I think. They got into a bit of an argument with their agent. And so once Drew hurt that shoulder, you could see why there was a plan in place to bring Phillip along. And Drew's credit, he rehabbed that thing. A lot of quarterbacks may not have rehabbed that shoulder to turn up what he did, and then he played so well afterwards.
Again, we are talking to former Chargers and Vikings punter Darren Bennett. Last question for me. And we were talking about how important special teams are and punters. I still don't understand how there's only one punter inducted into the Hall of Fame. One. All these years, and I've always said that they're a little harsh, the community of voters over there in the Hall of Fame. When you look at some of the greatest players at their positions, how is there only one punter, Darren, in the NFL Hall of Fame? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, look, when Ray Guy was voted in a couple of years ago, 20 of us went. And it was such a great brotherhood to go and support him going in because we understood what a significant moment that was. But years and years ago, I was spokesperson for NFL International. I went and played in NFL Europe, and I was just thankful to be involved. And I met Chuck Bednarik from the Green Bay Packers, and they introduced me and said was a great linebacker. And he goes, "You're an Australian?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, and he goes, "And you play in the league?" I go, "I do, yeah." And he goes, "What position do you play?" I go, "Punter." He goes, "Oh, shit, you're not even a real football player." When he did that, I understood, and it was made apparent to me straight away that punters would just go sit in the corner, be quiet. We don't really want to use you, but there's a rule that on fourth down, someone's got to kick the ball, so you better go out there. And so hopefully the last few years, punters making tackles, punters averaging over 40 yards, making huge differences. I mean, there's some guys. Mike Scifres should be seen as a guy that would go into the Hall of Fame. Shane Leckler from the Raiders, it was definitely had a consistency over 12 to 15 years where he should be seen as someone that should go into the Hall of Fame. Jeff Feagles, Jeff Feagles was part of the last of the great directional punters. Feags could sit there and just paint the sideline. And he wasn't a 58, 57-yarder, but he was super consistent. And he went to the Pro Bowl at like 42 years of age. So, when you look at it, he played 20 years in the NFL. So if you were a linebacker, I don't care if you were average as a linebacker. If you played 20 years in the NFL, they will put you in the Hall of Fame. And so eventually, hopefully, there will be a recognition of the guys that played every position because every position has its own thing. When I ran out on the field every day, I looked at it and went, I can't rush the quarterback. I can't throw 50-yard touchdowns, but none of you guys can do what I'm about to do right now. And so I had that confidence that the punting position was my position And I got injured once in my career, and they brought a young kid in to punt that week. It was the worst week of my career because I watched my punt team run out there with someone else standing 15 yards back, and I wanted to punch the kid every time he was out there. So I had that confidence that my position was that I couldn't do any of the other positions, but they couldn't do my job either. And so people will have to eventually respect the fact that punting is a part of the game, and hopefully will always be that.
So before I get to my last question, I just want to read 2 of Carl's comments. Carl says, Brian Moorman, do you shudder every time he gets lit up by Sean Taylor in the Pro Bowl? A massive, massive hit. And then also he mentions we could agree that Devin Hester needs to be in the Hall of Fame, and then we could add in punters as well. Yes, Devin
absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree with it. And there was, Ben Graham was staying at my house when he'd been cut by I think by Arizona, and his family had gone home to Australia, and I had his car, and he said, "Can you sell my car for me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he flew home to Australia, and then I get a message, and he goes, "Hey man, don't sell my car." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Rob Malone just punted down the middle to Devin Hester, and I'm going to Detroit." And I go, "What?" And they said, apparently on the sideline, the coach said, "The one thing you cannot do is let him touch the ball. Punt it out of bounds. I don't care what you do." And he yacked it inside, and Devin Hester obviously took him to the end zone. So I sent Ben's car up to Detroit, and he finished the season up there. But that's how devastating Devin was. At times, you make one little mistake, and you better make the tackle because he's bringing it back every time.
So my last question is, you were a teammate for a year in 2004 in Minnesota with Randy Moss. What was he like as a teammate? Do you have any good stories of him?
So I do. I have 2 sons. One of them punted here at the University of Tulsa, and that's why we moved to Tulsa. And we have a son who unfortunately passed away last year. William. He had muscular dystrophy. So on Mondays, I used to take them both in to the practice facility, and I'd leave them in the players' locker room. And they'd play Madden and do all that sort of stuff while I was in. And then Will in his wheelchair, and then Thomas, we'd go out onto the practice fields, and we'd have a kick around and run around and just mess around, and I'd just show them the facilities. So I come out after the special teams meeting, and everyone else has gone. We've had a team meeting, and everyone's in position meetings. And I'm walking down to get the boys, and I can hear this voice talking to them. And I'm like, stick my head in, and there's Randy playing Grand Theft Auto with my kids. And I'm like, "You guys were just going to play Madden?" And he goes, "No, man, they can play Madden anytime. Let's go." And he was playing Grand Theft Auto with my kids. And so that's what Randy was. Randy, the outside personality of Randy and the teammate personality were 2 different things. And then the other thing that Randy did, and it's one of my favorite photographs ever. When we first got there, we couldn't get wheelchair accessible seats in the Metrodome, so they put them in the overflow right in the corner of the end zone for preseason, knowing that people would give their seats up, and eventually we'd get a wheelchair accessible seat for Will. First touchdown of the season, Randy catches it over his shoulder in the corner of the end zone, and he puts the football in my son's lap, in Will's lap, and just runs off. And all my phone blows up after the game. They're like, "Will's on ESPN. Randy gave him the football." And I'm like, "What?" And so I look, and there he is on Sports Center. And I said to Randy, "Did you know that was my son?" And he goes, "I had no idea." He goes, "That little dude just looked like he needed a football." And so that to me, it's one of my favorite photos. And PR got a nice picture of it, and they blew it up, and Randy signed it to Will. And, so they were great mates. So, the outside Randy and the actual person of Randy are 2 totally different things. He was one of my favorite teammates, and pretty good football player as well.
Mm-hmm. Really good football player, but and Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer.
Total Hall of Famer. I mean, you could tell too. I played against him, and Jeff George was the quarterback, and he fumbled a shotgun snap, and I'm like, "Oh, we're going to get a sack," and he just picked it up and hauled it as far down the sideline as he possibly could. And I'm like, "Oh, well, he's throwing it away." And Randy caught up to that thing for a touchdown. There was no way he was going to catch anyone else. That would have been an incompletion. Randy just cruised past our DB, went down. I think it was Terrence Shaw too, who was one of our good DBs. Randy just picks that thing and runs in the end zone. I'm like, "Oh my God, I've never seen speed like that in my life." It was fantastic.
Well, that's what you have to do to catch a pass from Jeff George.
Yeah. And there was a lot of those guys over my career. You just go, that's one of the best athletes I've ever seen in my life.
Fantastic. But we really appreciate you joining us, Darren. We know you're a busy guy. I hope your knees get better. We definitely like to talk to you again. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.